The conference hall stretched 300 meters across, built from materials that shimmered like pearl under the artificial lighting. Patricia Okonkwo had walked these floors dozens of times over the past 5 years, but today felt different. Today, every species in the Galactic Council seemed to be watching humanity with particular interest, and none of it felt friendly. She adjusted her formal diplomatic jacket and tried not to think about the weight of 3 entire star systems resting on whatever decision she made in the next 48 hours. The translator implant behind her ear buzzed with dozens of conversations happening around her, most of them speculating about how quickly Earth would surrender its territorial claims. Nobody expected humanity to fight. Nobody thought they could win. War Master Thraxon entered from the eastern gate and the entire hall fell silent. He stood 7 feet tall, covered in scales that ranged from deep emerald to almost black, with ceremonial scars carved across his chest that marked every victory he'd won for the Kyril Empire. Behind him, 4 handlers struggled with chains attached to something massive hidden beneath a hover transport cage. The cage hummed with containment fields strong enough to hold a small spacecraft. Patricia felt her stomach tighten. She'd read the reports about chiral battle serpents, but reading about them and seeing one were entirely different experiences. The handlers deactivated the cage's outer shell, and Nagath emerged into the light. 20 feet of engineered death, scales like overlapping armor plates, eyes that glowed with an unsettling intelligence. Its head alone was larger than Patricia's entire torso, and when it tasted the air with a forked tongue, she could see venom dripping from fangs that could punch through reinforced steel. The crowd erupted in appreciative murmurs. Several species made gestures of respect. The Vryn ambassador actually bowed, which Patricia had never seen before. Battle serpents represented the pinnacle of the Chiril's genetic engineering programs, creatures bred over thousands of years specifically for these ritual combats. Nagath had fought 12 times and won every match, most of them ending in less than 5 minutes. Thraxon's voice boomed across the hall without need for translation. The Kyril language was designed to carry across battlefields, all harsh consonants and growling vowels. Ambassador Okonkwo, Earth claims 3 systems that belong to the Kyril Empire, by right of proximity and historical precedent. You have refused all negotiations, therefore I invoke the right of trial, as is my privilege under council law. Choose your champion, or forfeit your claim. Patricia stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. She'd practiced this moment 100 times in her mind, but somehow it still felt surreal. Behind her, Dr. Raymond Cross made a nervous sound. He'd been advising her for weeks, showing her footage of previous trials, explaining the biology of various predator species that Earth might field as champions. None of his suggestions had felt right. The right of trial is acknowledged, Patricia said, and her voice carried through the hall's amplification system. Earth will present its champion within the required time frame. Thraxon's face split into what might have been a smile, though it showed far too many teeth to be friendly. 48 standard hours. I suggest you bring something with teeth, Ambassador. Nagath has not eaten today and he grows hungry. The crowd laughed, a sound that mixed dozens of species into something that raised the hair on Patricia's neck. She turned and walked out of the hall with as much dignity as she could manage, not looking back even though she felt thousands of eyes following her exit. Raymond hurried to keep pace, his datapad clutched against his chest. That thing is enormous, he said once they were clear of the hall and moving through the station's diplomatic corridors. Patricia, I don't think any of the options we discussed can handle that. The African lion is powerful but half that size. The saltwater crocodile has the bite force, but it's an ambush predator, not built for that kind of arena combat. The grizzly bear might have the mass, but battle serpents are faster than... I know, Patricia interrupted. She stopped at a viewport that showed the planet Meridian 7 rotating slowly below. All blue oceans and green continents. Somewhere down there, species had evolved and fought and survived for millions of years, just like on Earth. The difference was that most of them had done it on gentle worlds with normal gravity and reasonable predators. Earth had been harsher. Earth had been crueler. Raymond, stop thinking about what should work on paper. Start thinking about what actually represents humanity. Raymond blinked behind his glasses. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Think about human history. Every time someone bigger and stronger showed up, we didn't win by being bigger or stronger ourselves. We won by being too stubborn to quit, too mean to die, too crazy to recognize when we were beaten. Patricia pulled out her personal communicator and began scrolling through contacts she'd accumulated over the years. I need to make a call to Earth, to someone who understands that winning and being the biggest aren't the same thing. Who are you calling? Patricia found the contact she was looking for and initiated the connection. A zookeeper in Botswana who once told me the most terrifying creature he'd ever worked with weighed 25 pounds and gave exactly zero regard to anything that tried to kill it. The call connected, and a weathered face appeared on the screen, surrounded by what looked like the African bush at sunset. Walter Moss squinted at the camera like he'd just been interrupted from something important. Patricia, it's been 3 years. Last time you called, you wanted to know if we'd ever domesticated any apex predators. I assume this isn't a social call either? Walter, I need advice. What's the meanest animal on Earth? Walter didn't even hesitate. That depends. Do you mean the strongest? The most venomous? The best hunter? I mean the one that doesn't know how to quit. The one that looks at something twice its size and decides to attack instead of run. The one that makes other predators nervous. Walter's weathered face split into a grin that showed a gold tooth in the back. Oh, you want Grendel? Who's Grendel? Not who. What? And I think you better let me explain this in person because you're not going to believe me over the phone. Walter Moss had spent 40 years working with wildlife, and in that time he'd been bitten, clawed, charged, spat on, and once memorably head-butted by an irritated elephant. None of those experiences had fully prepared him for the moment when Earth's diplomatic corps called him with an emergency request to help represent humanity in an interstellar conflict. Life got strange in unexpected ways. Now he stood in Patricia's temporary office on the station, having been transported up from Earth on a priority shuttle that made the trip in 6 hours instead of the usual 12. His boots felt wrong in the artificial gravity, and everything smelled too clean like hospitals or laboratories. He missed the smell of dust and grass. Raymond Cross was showing footage of the battle Serpent on a large display screen, and Walter had to admit it was impressive. The creature moved like flowing water, all controlled power and predatory grace. Its scales looked thick enough to stop bullets, and those fangs could probably punch through a car door. This is what we're facing, Raymond said, freezing the image on Nagath's head. 20 feet long, approximately 800 pounds, enhanced musculature, venom that causes immediate paralysis and tissue necrosis, intelligence estimated at the level of a trained military dog, and armor plating that registers as harder than Kevlar on standard testing. Patricia sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, watching Walter's face. Raymond spent 3 weeks analyzing our options. Lions, tigers, bears, crocodiles, even suggested a bull elephant. The problem is that none of them match the Council's rules about natural champions. What rules? Walter asked. The champion has to be unmodified, Raymond explained. No genetic engineering, no mechanical enhancements, no chemical augmentation. It has to be a natural product of your planet's evolution. The Kirill bred their battle serpents, yes, but they claim that selective breeding doesn't count as modification, because no individual animal is changed, just the bloodline over time. The Council allows it, Walter grunted, so they can bring the result of thousands of years of selective breeding. But we can't give a lion a suit of armor or teach a bear to use weapons. Exactly. It has to be animal versus animal, natural traits only. Patricia leaned forward. You mentioned someone named Grendel on our call. Tell me about him. Walter settled into the chair across from her desk and tried to find the right words. Grendel is a honey badger. Specifically, he's a 25-pound male that we've been studying at the reserve for 3 years. Before that, he lived wild in the Northern Territories until he became such a problem that local communities asked us to relocate him. A badger? Raymond looked confused. Like the European badger? Those are burrowing animals. Omnivores. They're not even particularly aggressive unless cornered. European badgers are different, Walter said. Honey badgers are from Africa. Different family, different attitude, different everything. The name is misleading because it makes them sound cute or harmless. He pulled out his own datapad and brought up footage from the reserve. This is from 2 months ago. We'd reinforced Grendel's enclosure with steel mesh and concrete after he escaped the 4th time. The footage showed a black and gray animal with a distinctive white stripe down its back, about the size of a medium dog but built low to the ground. It approached the enclosure wall, studied it for maybe 10 seconds, then began digging. The speed was remarkable. Dirt flying in fountains as powerful claws tore through soil like it was water. Within minutes, The badger had tunneled under the concrete foundation and disappeared from view. We found him 6 hours later in the supply building, raiding the food storage. He'd opened 3 locked doors by tearing the hinges off. Walter swiped to another video. This is from last year before we captured him. This footage was from a camera trap in the wild. It showed Grendel approaching a beehive in a tree, completely ignoring the thousands of bees swarming around him. The insects covered his face and body, stinging repeatedly. The badger didn't react. He simply climbed the tree, tore the hive apart with methodical efficiency, and ate the honey and larvae while bees continued their futile assault. His skin was too thick for their stingers to penetrate properly, and whatever venom did get through seemed to bother him about as much as light rain. That's interesting, Patricia said, but I'm not seeing how this helps us against an armored serpent with venom that can melt steel. Walter swiped to the next video. This one is why the locals wanted him relocated. Fair warning, it's not pleasant. The footage showed a lioness, probably young based on her size, investigating something near a waterhole. Grendel emerged from the grass, and Walter could see even through the camera's limited angle that the badger had no intention of backing down. The lioness saw him, made what was probably supposed to be an intimidating display, roaring and showing her teeth. Grendel attacked. Not defensively, not as a last resort, but as an opening move. He went straight for the lion's face, moving faster than something his size should be able to move, making sounds that Walter could only describe as rage given voice. The lioness tried to bat him away, got bitten on the paw for her trouble, and made a decision that probably saved her life. She ran. Grendel pursued her for almost 100 meters before apparently deciding he'd made his point and returning to whatever he'd been doing before the interruption. Raymond stared at the screen. That can't be normal behavior. Lions are apex predators. They're not supposed to run from something that small. Honey badgers have a reputation, Walter said. Leopards avoid them. Hyenas avoid them. I've seen footage of them chasing young elephants away from watering holes. It's not about size or strength. It's about the fact that they genuinely do not care. They don't have a retreat instinct that works properly. They have thick, loose skin that lets them twist around even when something has them in its jaws. They have claws that can tear through wood and meat with equal ease. They have jaws strong enough to crack tortoise shells, and they're highly resistant to venom. Resistant to venom? Patricia's eyes narrowed. How resistant? They're not immune, but they have a high tolerance. Snake venom that would kill a human in minutes might knock a honey badger out for a few hours, and then it wakes up and continues about its day. There's footage of them eating cobras and puff adders like they're particularly chewy sausages. Walter pulled up a research document. Scientists think it's an adaptation from millions of years of raiding beehives and fighting venomous snakes for food. Their bodies process toxins differently than most mammals. Raymond was frantically taking notes. What about intelligence? The battle serpent is smart. It won't fight like a wild animal. It'll have strategy. Honey badgers are highly intelligent. Tool use has been documented. Problem-solving abilities that rival some primates. And Grendel specifically is smart even by honey badger standards. That's why he kept escaping. He'd watch us repair the enclosure, then test different spots until he found a weakness. Walter closed his datapad. Here's what I can tell you. If you send a lion or a bear or a crocodile against that battle serpent, you're sending something that's used to being at the top of the food chain. They've never met something they couldn't intimidate or overpower. They have instincts that tell them when to back down, when the fight isn't worth it. And Grendel has met plenty of things bigger and stronger than him. His response is always the same. Attack first, don't stop until it leaves, and never ever show fear. Walter met Patricia's eyes. You wanted something that represents humanity? That stubborn refusal to recognize when we're beaten? That ability to look at something that should terrify us and decide to fight anyway? That's a honey badger. That's Grendel. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. The council is going to think we've lost our minds. They'll see him and think we're insulting them. Good, Walter said. Let them underestimate us. That's when humans do our best work. The Grand Arena had been constructed specifically for trials like this. A massive biodome that could simulate environments from a dozen different worlds. Today it was set to neutral territory. A compromise that looked like scrubland from half the planets in the council. Brown earth, scattered rocks, some tough grass that could survive anything. The temperature held steady at 25 degrees Celsius with low humidity. No advantage to either side. 50,000 beings filled the stadium seating that rose in tiers around the arena floor. Patricia had never seen so many different species in one place. Some breathed oxygen like humans, others wore atmosphere suits, and a few existed in specialized viewing tanks filled with liquids she couldn't identify. All of them were here to watch what they expected to be a quick and decisive victory for the Chiral Empire. The betting markets had opened 2 hours ago. Earth's odds currently stood at 500 to 1. Patricia had checked. She stood in the human delegation box with Raymond and a handful of other Earth officials who'd arrived to witness what they probably expected to be a humiliating defeat. Walter was down on the arena floor, standing near the entry gate with a standard pet carrier sitting at his feet. He'd refused any kind of ceremonial entrance, said it would just agitate Grendel unnecessarily. The Badger didn't like being confined, and he liked being paraded around even less. Across the arena, Thraxon made his entrance to thunderous applause. He walked slowly, letting the crowd appreciate his presence, his scales gleaming under the arena lights. Behind him, 4 handlers struggled with Nagath, the battle serpent moving with liquid grace despite the control harness. When they released the harness, the serpent flowed into the center of the arena and raised its head, tasting the air. Its eyes reflected the lights like mirrors. The crowd roared approval. Several species made ritual gestures. Patricia saw money changing hands in the betting sections. Nobody was backing Earth. Nobody except a few humans who'd bet on their own champion out of loyalty rather than logic. A hovering drone descended to the center of the arena, projecting a holographic referee from the neutral arbiter species. They were known for their impartiality, having no stake in galactic politics and no capacity for favoritism. The referee's voice boomed through translation systems in every language simultaneously. This trial is witnessed by the Council and bound by ancient law. 2 champions enter representing their people's claim. The combat continues until submission, incapacitation, or death. No interference is permitted. No outside assistance is allowed. Natural abilities only. Do both parties accept these terms? Thraxon raised one clawed hand. The Chiral Empire accepts. Patricia's voice came through the communication system. Earth accepts. Walter knelt down by the carrier and undid the latches. He didn't make a show of it, didn't hesitate. He simply opened the door and stepped back, giving Grendel room to emerge on his own terms. The Badger took his time, checking his surroundings with the careful attention of a predator entering unfamiliar territory. The crowd's noise dropped to confused murmurs. Patricia heard the translation system struggling to keep up with dozens of languages, all asking variations of the same question. What was Earth thinking? That creature was tiny. Was this some kind of joke? A gesture of surrender? The human delegation had brought a pet to fight a battle serpent? Thraxon stared across the arena, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion to something that might have been anger. He turned to look up at the human delegation box, and his voice carried clearly even without amplification. Is this mockery? You bring this. This small thing against Nagath? You insult the tradition of trial by combat. Patricia stood and leaned forward so her voice would carry. That is Earth's champion. If you wish to withdraw your challenge, the Chiral Empire may do so without penalty. Otherwise, let the trial proceed as agreed. Walter had already moved to the edge of the arena, well clear of the combat zone. He caught Patricia's eye and gave a small nod. Grendel was as ready as he'd ever be, which meant Grendel was about to do what Grendel always did. Fight first, think later, and never stop until everything that threatened him was gone or dead. The referee drone scanned both champions. Earth's champion registers as unmodified and within acceptable parameters. Chiral champion registers as selectively bred but unmodified. Both champions are approved. The trial begins now. The drone shot upward, clearing the combat zone. For a moment, nothing happened. Nagath remained coiled in the center of the arena, head raised, watching the small creature that had emerged from the carrier. The serpent's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, analyzing this strange opponent. Battle serpents were intelligent. They'd been bred for strategy as much as strength. Nagath was trying to understand what threat this tiny animal could possibly pose. Grendel made no such analysis. He simply started walking toward the serpent, his gait efficient and purposeful. No hesitation, no fear display, no submission posture, just a direct approach like he was heading to investigate something mildly interesting. The crowd went completely silent. Patricia realized she was holding her breath. Thraxon growled something in Chiral that the translators rendered as, "Nagath, attack. End this farce." The battle serpent struck with the speed that had made it famous. 20 feet of muscle and scale moving faster than most beings could track. Fangs extended, aiming to end the fight in a single bite. It was the same attack that had killed a Vryn Crusher beast in the first minute of their trial. It should have been over instantly. Grendel wasn't there. He'd shifted at the last possible moment, low to the ground, and the serpent's fangs snapped shut on empty air. Before Nagath could recover, Grendel was inside its striking range, going for the head with his claws extended. He was too close for the serpent to bite effectively, and he was moving constantly, never staying in one position long enough for Nagath to pin him. The first drops of blood fell to the arena floor. They were dark green, and they came from a cut just above Nagath's left eye. The cut wasn't deep, but it was in a vulnerable spot that the serpent's armor plating didn't fully cover. Grendel had found it in less than 5 seconds of combat. The crowd erupted in shocked sounds. Patricia heard Raymond muttering beside her, pulling up biological data on his datapad. Thraxon had gone very still, watching his champion struggle against something the size of a standard dog. Nagath tried to wrap around Grendel, using the constriction technique that had crushed opponents in previous trials. The serpent's body coiled with perfect precision, muscles designed to squeeze with thousands of pounds of pressure. But Grendel's skin was loose, and when the serpent tried to maintain its grip, the badger simply twisted inside his own hide, biting and clawing at whatever part of Nagath was closest. More green blood fell. Nagath released its grip and struck again with its fangs, and this time it connected. Patricia saw the serpent's venom spray as the fangs punctured Grendel's shoulder. That venom could paralyze a grizzly bear in seconds. It should have ended the fight right there. Grendel made a sound that Patricia had never heard before, something between a growl and a cough. He shook his head like he was trying to clear water from his ears, then immediately went back to attacking. The venom was in his system, but it wasn't stopping him. His shoulder bled from the puncture wounds, but he showed no sign of pain or paralysis. Raymond's voice was shaking. His metabolism is processing the venom. Not fast enough to neutralize it, but fast enough that it's not incapacitating him. That's not supposed to be possible with chiral venom. Their toxins are synthetic augmented versions designed to work on any carbon-based life form. Apparently, Patricia said softly. Nobody told Grendel that. In the arena, the fight continued. But something had changed. Nagath was no longer attacking. The battle serpent was defending, trying to create distance, trying to escape from the small creature that refused to stop, refused to slow down, and refused to acknowledge that it should have been dead 3 times over by now. Patricia saw fear. Not in Grendel, who showed no emotion except focused aggression, but in Nagath, whose movements had shifted from predatory confidence to something that looked disturbingly like panic. The battle serpent had never faced anything like this before. Nothing that wouldn't stop. Nothing that couldn't be intimidated. Nothing that kept coming no matter what damage it took or what pain it endured. The crowd had gone silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of beings watching something that challenged their understanding of how combat worked. The small creature was supposed to lose. That was how nature operated. But nature apparently worked differently on Earth. The fight had been going for 15 minutes and Nagath was losing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily and inevitably. Every exchange left the battle serpent with new wounds, while Grendel continued his assault with mechanical persistence. The badger had been bitten twice more, clawed once, and slammed into a rock hard enough that Patricia heard the impact from her seat. None of it mattered. None of it stopped him. Raymond was providing running commentary into his datapad, documenting everything for the scientific record. The loose skin is key. Watch there. The serpent tries to bite and hold, but Grendel twists inside his own hide and the teeth can't maintain purchase. It's like trying to grab a bag of muscle that can move independently of its container, and his pain response is severely reduced. Most mammals would be incapacitated by those injuries, but honey badgers have fewer pain receptors than typical species. Evolution in an environment with venomous snakes, stinging insects, and competing predators. Patricia barely heard him. She was watching Thraxon, who stood at the edge of the arena with his hands gripping the barrier rail hard enough to leave dents in the metal. The War Master's scales had darkened, a sign of stress in chiral physiology. He was witnessing something impossible by his species' understanding of combat. The smaller fighter should have died. Should have at least retreated. Should have shown some survival instinct that recognized when the battle was lost. But Grendel didn't have that instinct. Or if he did, it was buried under layers of aggression that evolution had hardened over millions of years. Every predator on Earth had learned to leave honey badgers alone, not because they couldn't kill one, but because the cost wasn't worth it. You might win, but you'd be injured, weakened, vulnerable to other threats, better to find easier prey. Nagath was learning that lesson now. The battle serpent tried another constriction, wrapping around Grendel with desperate strength. Patricia saw muscles bulging under those armored scales, pressure that should have crushed bones and ruptured organs. Grendel's response was to bite down on the serpent's body and not let go, his jaws working methodically through scale and skin and muscle. The badger's teeth weren't designed for clean kills. They were designed for tearing and breaking things that didn't want to be torn and broken. Green blood pooled on the arena floor. Nagath released its grip and tried to pull away, but Grendel held on, claws dug in, jaws locked. The serpent had to physically scrape the badger off against a rock, leaving more skin behind in the process. Grendel landed, shook himself, and immediately charged back in. The alien commentators had stopped trying to analyze the fight. Patricia could hear their translation feeds, and the confusion was universal. This wasn't how combat worked. The small fighter was supposed to use speed and agility to avoid damage while looking for critical strikes. Instead, Grendel was using a strategy that could only be described as overwhelming aggression backed by complete indifference to his own welfare. He wasn't trying to avoid being hit. He was trading damage for damage and simply refusing to acknowledge that he was taking the worse end of the exchange. Except he wasn't. That was the terrifying part. Nagath had landed a dozen significant hits, any of which should have crippled or killed a creature Grendel's size. The badger was bleeding from multiple wounds, had been poisoned repeatedly, and had taken impacts that would have shattered human bones. He was still fighting at the same intensity as the first minute. If anything, he seemed angrier now, making sounds that Patricia's translator couldn't properly render, probably because they weren't meant to be communication. They were just expressions of fury. Nagath struck again, and this time Grendel went for the serpent's eyes. One of his claws caught the edge of Nagath's left eye socket, and the battle serpent made a sound that definitely translated as pain. The serpent jerked back, and for the first time it turned away from its opponent, not to set up another attack, just to create distance. Thraxon roared something from the sideline. The translator rendered it as, "Stand your ground." "You are Kyril! You do not retreat." Nagath hesitated, caught between instinct and training. Its head swiveled between the War Master and the small creature that refused to stop attacking. Patricia saw intelligence in those eyes, and she saw something else. Recognition. The battle serpent had fought many opponents, but this was the first time it had faced something that genuinely wanted to kill it and had no intention of stopping until one of them was dead. Grendel made the decision easier by charging again. This time Nagath didn't try to fight. The serpent coiled and struck, but it was a defensive strike, meant to push the badger back rather than kill. When Grendel dodged and counterattacked, Nagath retreated. The battle serpent was running. The crowd erupted in sounds of shock. Several species stood from their seats. The betting markets, Patricia noticed on a side monitor, had frozen entirely. Nobody knew what to do when the established order of combat broke down this completely. Thraxon vaulted the barrier and entered the arena. It was a violation of the rules, but the referee drone didn't immediately intervene. Perhaps even the neutral arbiters weren't sure how to handle this situation. The War Master strode toward his champion, and Patricia saw rage in every line of his body. To have your champion refuse combat was a fundamental humiliation in Kyril culture. It suggested weakness not just in the creature but in the warrior who commanded it. "Nagath," Thraxon's voice carried across the arena. "You will fight. You will kill this pathetic creature. You will—" The War Master stopped. He'd gotten close enough to see his champion clearly, and what he saw made him go silent. Nagath was covered in wounds. Deep cuts leaked green blood from dozens of places where Grendel's claws and teeth had found purchase. One eye was partially closed from damage to the surrounding tissue. Scales had been torn loose in patches, showing vulnerable skin beneath. The serpent's movements were slower than before, not from physical exhaustion, but from accumulated pain and the growing certainty that continuing this fight meant death. Battle serpents were intelligent enough to fight. They were also intelligent enough to recognize when fighting was suicide. Nagath had made its choice. It coiled into a defensive position and refused to advance even when Thraxon commanded it. The serpent was done. Grendel, however, was not. The badger saw the retreating opponent and pressed his advantage, crossing the distance with that same purposeful stride. He was limping slightly now, and his left shoulder was clearly damaged from the venom, but none of it slowed him down enough to matter. He reached Nagath's coiled body and immediately began looking for vulnerable spots to attack. The battle serpent didn't fight back. It shifted position to protect its head and eyes, but it made no offensive moves. When Grendel bit down on its tail, Nagath pulled away but didn't strike. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the small earth creature continued his assault on an opponent that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds and refused to defend itself beyond passive resistance. Walter's voice came through the communication system, addressing the referee. "Is this sufficient for submission? Because Grendel will keep going until someone tells him to stop." The referee drone descended toward the arena floor, scanning both champions with sensors. The Kyril champion has refused combat. The Earth champion continues to press attack. By the laws of trial, this constitutes submission through withdrawal from battle. The trial is concluded. Earth's champion is victorious. The declaration seemed to take several seconds to process through 50,000 minds simultaneously. Then the noise started. Not cheering, not applause, but a wave of shocked exclamations and arguments and demands for clarification. This wasn't how trials ended. The smaller fighter didn't win. The weaker species didn't overcome the stronger through sheer refusal to acknowledge reality. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Clearly, none of these species had much experience with Earth's approach to problems. Humans had been the smaller, weaker species for most of their history. They'd survived by being too stubborn to recognize when they should have gone extinct. Apparently, that trait extended to their wildlife. Walter walked calmly into the arena and produced a whistle from his pocket. One short, sharp blast. Grendel's head came up immediately, ears forward, attention shifting from the bleeding serpent to the familiar human. Walter whistled again and patted his leg. Grendel considered for a moment, looked back at Nagath as if contemplating whether the fight was really over, then trotted toward Walter with the satisfied air of someone who'd accomplished a good day's work. The badger had blood on his face, both his own and Nagath's. His left shoulder was swollen and would need treatment for the venom. His coat had several bald patches where scales had scraped away fur. None of it seemed to bother him. He allowed Walter to check him over briefly, then began grooming himself while sitting on the arena floor, completely unconcerned with the 50,000 aliens staring at him in disbelief. Thraxon stood motionless, staring at his defeated champion. Nagath had uncurled slightly but made no move to approach its master. The War Master's scales had gone pale, another stress response. He looked up at the human delegation box, and Patricia met his gaze steadily. After a long moment, Thraxon bowed. It was a small gesture, barely more than a nod, but from a Kyril War Master it meant everything. Patricia stood and addressed the arena through the communication system. Earth formally claims the 3 disputed systems as our sovereign territory, as is our right by victory and trial. We hope this demonstrates humanity's commitment to council law and our capability as a member species. The formal words felt inadequate somehow, but they were what the moment required. Patricia had learned that in diplomacy, understatement often carried more weight than grand declarations. Let the footage speak for itself. Let the other species draw their own conclusions about what humanity was capable of when pushed. As she watched Walter carry Grendel out of the arena in the pet carrier, the badger already falling asleep from exhaustion and venom, Patricia reflected that sometimes the best representative of humanity wasn't a soldier, or a scientist, or a diplomat. Sometimes it was a 25-pound ball of fury that had never learned the meaning of surrender. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and something vaguely chemical that Walter couldn't identify. Probably alien medical compounds being used on other species throughout the station. He sat on a bench outside the treatment room while a xenovet examined Grendel, and he tried not to think about how strange his life had become. 3 days ago, he'd been tracking migration patterns of wildebeest. Now he was on a space station waiting to hear if a honey badger had permanent damage from alien snake venom. The door opened, and the vet emerged, a Vryn female with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. She looked tired, which Walter understood. Grendel was probably not an easy patient. The badger didn't enjoy being handled by strangers, and he'd already been in a bad mood before the examination started. "He'll be fine," the vet said, her translator rendering the words in English with a slight accent. The venom caused significant tissue damage to his left shoulder, but his body has already begun neutralizing the toxins. I've never seen anything like it. His immune response is remarkable. We applied standard healing accelerators to the wounds, and he should be fully recovered in 3 days. Walter nodded. Can I see him? He's sedated right now. We had to for everyone's safety. He tried to bite me twice and succeeded once. She held up one of her hands, showing a bandaged finger. But yes, you can sit with him. He'll sleep for another 6 hours. Walter followed her into the treatment room. Grendel lay on a padded table, his breathing slow and steady. Someone had cleaned the blood from his coat, and the wounds were covered with transparent medical film that glowed faintly blue. The badger looked smaller when he was sleeping, less like a weapon and more like the wild animal he actually was. Walter pulled a chair close and settled in to wait. He'd been there for maybe 20 minutes when the door opened again. Walter looked up expecting Patricia or Raymond, but instead found himself facing War Master Thraxon. The Chiral had to duck to fit through the doorway, and his scales still looked pale, though not as badly as in the arena. He stood for a moment, seeming uncertain, which Walter suspected was not a familiar feeling for him. May I enter? Thraxon asked, and the translator carried a note of formality that suggested this was important to him. It's your station, Walter said. But if you're here to demand a rematch or claim the fight was unfair, you can leave now. I'm too tired for politics. Thraxon's head tilted slightly, a gesture Walter couldn't interpret. I am not here for politics. I am here because I do not understand what happened in that arena, and I find that I need to understand. You are this creature's handler. Perhaps you can explain. Walter gestured to another chair. Thraxon folded himself into it with some difficulty, clearly not designed for his frame. For a moment they both sat in silence, watching Grendel breathe. Nagith has fought 12 times, Thraxon said finally. 12 victories against the strongest creatures other species could field. Battle serpents are bred from birth for combat. They are trained, conditioned, enhanced through careful genetics. Nagith should have won in minutes. Instead, he refused to fight. He showed fear. The War Master's voice carried shame. I do not understand how your creature defeated him. Walter thought about how to explain it. He'd spent years studying animal behavior, but that didn't mean he fully understood Grendel either. Your battle serpent is exactly what you said. Bred for combat, trained to fight and win. But here's the thing about training and breeding. You're always optimizing for specific conditions. You're making something that's very good at winning the kind of fights you expect them to face. Yes, that is the purpose of breeding programs. Right. But Grendel wasn't bred for anything. He's the result of millions of years of evolution in an environment where being the biggest or strongest didn't matter as much as being the most stubborn. Honey badgers evolved in a world with lions, leopards, hyenas, venomous snakes, and thousands of other things that could kill them. They survived by developing a defensive strategy that basically amounts to attack everything and never stop. Thraxon looked at the sleeping badger. That is not a strategy. That is madness. It's both, Walter agreed. But it works. See predators on Earth, the smart ones, they learn to leave honey badgers alone. Not because they can't kill one. They can, usually. But because even if you win, you're going to get hurt badly enough that you become vulnerable to other threats. It's not worth it. Better to find easier prey. Nagith is not prey. He is a warrior. And that's exactly why he lost. Walter leaned forward. Your battle serpent is intelligent. You said so yourself. That intelligence means he can recognize when a fight isn't worth continuing, when the cost of victory is too high. That's a survival instinct. It's actually a good thing in most situations. It is weakness, no, it's practicality. But it's also a vulnerability when you face something that doesn't have that calculation process. Grendel doesn't think about cost. He doesn't weigh risk versus reward. He sees a threat and he attacks, and he doesn't stop attacking until the threat goes away or he dies. There's no middle ground. Your serpent's intelligence became a disadvantage because it let him recognize that Grendel would never stop, never tire, never show mercy or fear. Nagith was fighting something that didn't follow the rules of normal combat. Thraxon was quiet for a long time. On my world, he said slowly, we value strength, size, power. A warrior who continues fighting despite injuries is honored, but a warrior who cannot recognize when retreat is necessary is considered foolish. We would not celebrate a creature like this. Different worlds, different survival pressures, Walter said. Earth is, well, we call it harsh. Nearly every environment has something trying to kill you. Extreme temperatures, natural disasters, predators, diseases, venomous creatures, parasites. Humanity evolved in that environment. Our wildlife evolved in that environment. It made us different than what you'd get on a gentler world. Your species calls this HFY, Thraxon said, and Walter blinked in surprise. The War Master noticed his reaction. I looked it up after the trial. Humanity, fuck yeah. A crude phrase, but it expresses something important. The idea that humans are unusual among species, that they survive through stubbornness rather than superiority. That's one interpretation. Is it wrong? Walter looked at Grendel again. No, not wrong. Humans aren't the strongest or fastest or smartest species on our own planet. We're not even close. But we're the only ones who looked at the stars and decided to go there. We're the only ones who see something that should kill us and try to figure out how to survive it anyway. That's not unique to humans, though. That's an Earth trait. Life on our world learned to be stubborn because the ones who weren't stubborn died out, and this creature embodies that trait. Yeah, Grendel is what you get when you take that survival strategy and compress it into 25 pounds of muscle and bad attitude. Walter smiled slightly. I didn't train him to fight. I didn't modify him or enhance him. I just let him be what millions of years of evolution made him. That was enough. Thraxon stood, having to unfold himself from the chair carefully. I came here angry, humiliated. Nageth's defeat brings shame to my name and my empire. But I think I understand now that the shame is not in losing. The shame would be in refusing to learn from the loss. He looked down at Walter. Your species is young in the council. Many see you as weak, unproven. After today, that will change. Some will fear you. Some will respect you. But none will underestimate you again. Is that good or bad? That depends on what humanity does with that reputation. Thraxon moved toward the door, then paused. Tell me something. If I had brought a different champion, something larger or more fierce, would you still have chosen this creature? Walter thought about it. Honestly, probably. Because the question wasn't really about winning or losing. It was about showing the galaxy who humans are. And yeah, Grendel represents that better than anything else I could have chosen. Size doesn't matter. Strength doesn't matter. What matters is that you keep going even when everything says you should quit. Thraxon nodded slowly. Then perhaps your species will do well in the council after all. The galaxy is not kind to those who give up easily. He left, his footsteps heavy in the corridor outside. Walter settled back in his chair and watched Grendel sleep. The badger's whiskers twitched, probably dreaming about the fight or maybe just about raiding another beehive. It was hard to tell with Grendel. The badger lived entirely in the present moment without regret or doubt or fear. That was probably the most admirable thing about him. He was completely authentically himself, no matter what the situation demanded. Patricia arrived an hour later, bringing coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through recycled station water. It was terrible, but Walter drank it anyway. She sat down without saying anything, and they watched Grendel together for a while. The council has formally recognized our claim to all three systems, Patricia said eventually. No challenges, no objections. 4 other species have withdrawn territorial disputes with humanity in the past 2 hours. The Deltari ambassador specifically mentioned that they'd prefer to negotiate rather than face trial by combat. Because of Grendel? Because of what Grendel represents? The entire galaxy just learned that Earth produces creatures that don't understand the concept of surrender. That's a powerful deterrent. She sipped her terrible coffee. We're getting requests for information about other Earth species. What else we have? What else we might bring to future trials if necessary? Tell them we have bears. I did. Also mentioned tigers, saltwater crocodiles, and great white sharks. The xenobiology community is very interested. Patricia smiled. There's also been a surge in scientific exchange requests. Everyone wants to study Earth wildlife now. Apparently, your planet is considered a high-pressure evolutionary environment, which produces unusually aggressive survival adaptations. That's a fancy way of saying Earth is mean and so is everything on it. More or less. Patricia finished her coffee and stood. Get some rest. Once Grendel is cleared for travel, we'll get you both back to Earth. You've done enough for galactic politics for one lifetime. Walter watched her leave, then turned back to the sleeping badger. You hear that, Grendel? You're famous now. The entire galaxy knows your name. The badger's ear twitched, but otherwise he didn't react. Fame meant nothing to him. Food, territory, and removing threats. Those were the only things that mattered in Grendel's world. Maybe that simplicity was something humans had lost somewhere along the way to civilization, or maybe they'd just hidden it under layers of culture and politics and diplomacy. But it was still there, Walter thought. That core of stubbornness that refused to quit. Grendel hadn't won because he was stronger or smarter or better equipped. He'd won because giving up simply wasn't in his nature. That was very human when you got down to it. That was very Earth. 6 months had changed many things, but not the African bush. Walter stood at the edge of Grendel's enclosure, watching the badger excavate a new tunnel system that would probably lead to another escape attempt by next week. The enclosure had been rebuilt twice since their return from the council station, each time with better security measures, and each time Grendel had found a way through or under or around the improvements. Walter had stopped being frustrated about it. You couldn't change a honey badger's nature, and honestly, he wouldn't want to. The reserve had become something of a tourist attraction since the trial. People came from around the world to see the champion of Earth, though Grendel remained thoroughly unimpressed by his fame. He treated visitors with the same indifference he showed everything else except when they got too close to his territory. Then he made his feelings very clear, usually through aggressive displays that sent people scrambling backward, while Walter tried not to laugh. Earth's status in the Galactic Council had shifted in unexpected ways. 3 systems that had been disputed were now firmly under human control, their resource extraction already beginning. But more importantly, the trial had established humanity as a species that couldn't be intimidated. Diplomatic negotiations that had been stalling for years suddenly moved forward. Trade agreements appeared that had previously been impossible. Species that had dismissed Earth as insignificant now requested meetings and exchanges. Raymond visited once a month to check on Grendel and collect biological data. The xenobiology community had become fascinated with Earth's wildlife, and Raymond had built an entire research career on explaining why Earth creatures were the way they were. He was currently writing a paper on the evolutionary advantages of high pain tolerance in hostile environments. Grendel featured prominently in the research, though the badger remained unaware of his contribution to science. Patricia called every few weeks with updates from the council. More trials had been requested by various species, though none of them specifically challenged Earth. Instead, they wanted to observe how other species handled combat, wanted to understand the rules better before committing to confrontation. The trial with Nagath had made everyone more cautious. Nobody wanted to be the next empire humiliated by something small and furious from Earth. Today's call came through just after lunch. Walter answered his comm unit while watching Grendel investigate a beetle with the same intensity he'd shown fighting a battle serpent. Everything was equally important in the badger's world, or perhaps equally unimportant. It was hard to tell. "Walter, we have a situation," Patricia said without preamble. Her voice carried that particular tone that meant galactic politics had gotten complicated again. "What kind of situation?" "The Karani Collective has been making aggressive moves toward neutral territory near the galactic core. 3 species have filed complaints. The Council is considering intervention, but nobody wants to commit military forces, so they're talking about a trial again. But this time it's not about territory. It's about establishing whether the Karani have the right to enforce their territorial claims through military threat." Walter sat down on the bench outside Grendel's enclosure. "And this concerns Earth how?" "The Karani heard about our trial. They're demanding that if there's going to be a trial by combat, they want to face Earth's champion specifically. They think beating Grendel will prove that the Battle Serpent trial was a fluke, that Earth got lucky and that's stupid. Trials don't work that way. They're between the parties in the dispute. Normally, yes. But the Karani have found a loophole. They've claimed that Earth's presence in the Council is illegitimate because we haven't proven ourselves against a true warrior species like them. If we refuse the challenge, they'll push for our Council membership to be reviewed. If we accept and lose, same result." Patricia sighed. "Politics is rarely fair." Walter looked at Grendel, who had apparently decided the beetle was worthy of being eaten and was now grooming himself contentedly. "What does the Karani champion look like?" "That's the problem. They're bringing a razor wing. It's an aerial predator from their homeworld. Wingspan about 15 feet, talons that can cut through steel, and it's intelligent enough to use tactics. It can fly, Walter. How is Grendel supposed to fight something that can fly? Has anyone told them Grendel is just a normal animal from Earth? That he's not some kind of super warrior we bred specifically for combat? Yes, they don't believe us. They think we're hiding something, that Grendel must be enhanced or modified somehow. The fact that he survived chiral venom convinced them we've done something to him. Patricia's frustration came through clearly. I need to know if this is even possible. Can Grendel fight something that flies? Walter thought about it. Honey badgers occasionally hunt birds, but usually ground-dwelling ones, and he'd be at a serious disadvantage against something with that kind of reach advantage, but what? But Grendel doesn't really care about disadvantages. He's fought things bigger and more dangerous than him his whole life. The question isn't whether he can fight it. The question is whether the arena rules will let him use his natural advantages. Explain. Honey badgers are opportunistic hunters and incredibly smart problem solvers. In the wild, Grendel would probably wait for the bird to land or nest, then attack when it's vulnerable. He wouldn't try to fight it in the air because that's not how his species hunts. If the arena gives him any kind of cover or obstacles, he'll use them. If it's just open space, then yeah, he's in trouble. Patricia was quiet for a moment. The arena can be configured for different environments. We could request specific terrain features as part of the negotiation. Rocky outcrops, trees, anything that gives vertical terrain and cover. That's where honey badgers excel. They're climbers, diggers, ambush hunters. Give Grendel an environment he can use and he'll figure out a strategy. Walter paused. But Patricia, you need to understand something. Grendel isn't a soldier. He doesn't care about Earth's reputation or council politics. He's going to do what his instincts tell him, and sometimes that means taking risks that might get him killed. I won't put him in a fight that's designed to be unwinnable. I understand. Let me talk to the council about arena conditions. I'll push for terrain that's fair to both species. If they refuse, we refuse the challenge and deal with the political consequences. Patricia sounded tired. When did defending humanity's honor become dependent on a 25-pound badger? When the galaxy decided that trials by combat were a good way to solve disputes, Walter said. You built a system that favors aggression and spectacle. Grendel just happens to be very good at both. 2 weeks later, Walter stood in a different arena on a different station, but the feeling was familiar. 50,000 beings watching, betting markets running, commentators speculating. The difference was that this time, Earth had negotiated the terrain. The arena floor was configured with rock formations, fallen logs, and enough vegetation to provide cover. It looked like something between African scrubland and forest edge, environments where honey badgers thrived. The Karani champion entered from the eastern gate, and Walter had to admit it was impressive. The razor wing was massive, with dark blue feathers that shifted to purple in the light. Its talons looked like knives, and its beak could probably crack bones with ease. It took flight immediately, circling the arena with powerful wing beats, clearly comfortable with aerial dominance. Grendel emerged from his carrier with the same indifferent attitude as last time. He sniffed the air, checked his surroundings, and began exploring the terrain immediately. The razor wing screamed a challenge from above, a sound designed to intimidate prey. Grendel ignored it completely and continued his inspection of a particularly interesting rock formation. The referee declared the trial started, and the razor wing dove immediately, talons extended. It was a killing strike, fast and precise, exactly the kind of attack that had made razor wings apex predators on their homeworld. But Grendel had already disappeared into a gap between rocks, moving with the fluid speed that came from a lifetime of avoiding larger predators. The razor wing's talons scraped stone, and the bird had to pull up sharply to avoid crashing. The pattern repeated for several minutes. The razor wing would dive, Grendel would disappear into cover, and the bird would be forced to circle and try again. The crowd grew restless. This wasn't the spectacular combat they'd expected. It looked more like a frustrated hunter failing to catch clever prey. But Walter saw what Grendel was doing. The badger wasn't just hiding. He was learning the razor wing's attack patterns, timing its dives, understanding its behavior. And he was positioning himself near the largest rock formation, an outcrop that offered multiple levels and ledges. When the razor wing dove again, Grendel didn't hide. He climbed, moving up the rock face with surprising speed. The bird followed, perhaps thinking it had finally cornered its target. It landed on a ledge above Grendel, wings spread for balance, preparing to drop down and strike. That was the mistake. On the ground, the razor wing could take off easily. On a narrow ledge, it needed space and time to launch properly. Grendel didn't give it either. He surged upward, claws finding purchase on rock and feather, jaws aiming for the bird's leg. The Razorwing screamed and tried to take off, but Grendel's weight and grip made flight impossible. They tumbled off the ledge together, a tangle of fur and feathers and fury. The impact would have stunned most creatures. Grendel landed on top, which probably helped, but even so, the fall was significant. The badger shook himself and immediately resumed his attack, going for the Razorwing's wings. Once those were damaged, the bird's primary advantage was gone. The Razorwing fought back with beak and talons drawing blood, but it was designed for aerial combat, not ground wrestling. And wrestling was exactly what this had become. The bird was larger, but size didn't matter when your opponent could twist inside his own skin and bite through the tendons in your wings. 10 minutes later, the Razorwing submitted, one wing too damaged for flight, covered in bite marks and scratches. Grendel released it only when Walter whistled, and even then, the badger seemed disappointed that the fight was over. He trotted back to Walter with the satisfied air of someone who'd solved an interesting puzzle. The announcement of Earth's victory seemed almost anticlimactic. Patricia handled the formal declarations, the Korani representative withdrew their challenge, and the council confirmed once again that humanity's membership was legitimate, and their methods, while unusual, were within all established rules. Walter carried Grendel out of the arena and back toward the medical bay for the routine post-fight examination. The badger was already falling asleep in the carrier, exhausted but uninjured except for some minor scratches. Patricia caught up with them in the corridor, accompanied by Raymond and several council officials who wanted to discuss arena regulations and Earth's classification as a high-pressure evolutionary environment. How did you know he'd figure out how to ground the bird? Patricia asked. I didn't, not for certain. But honey badgers are problem solvers. They figure out how to open locked containers, how to escape enclosures, how to access food sources that should be impossible to reach. The Razorwing was just another problem, and Grendel approached it the same way he approaches everything, with persistence and a complete refusal to give up. Walter adjusted the carrier's weight. Besides, the Korani made the same mistake everyone makes. They looked at Grendel and saw a small creature. They should have been looking at what he represents, which is Earth. We're not the biggest species in the galaxy. We're not the strongest or the most advanced. But we got to the stars anyway because we don't quit when things get hard. We adapt, we solve problems, and we keep going even when everyone says it's impossible. Walter smiled. Grendel is just the most honest version of that trait. No politics, no diplomacy, just pure stubborn determination wrapped in fur. One of the council officials, a species Walter didn't recognize, spoke up. Ambassador Okonkwo, Earth's trials have created significant interest in alternative combat approaches. Several species are now reconsidering their traditional champion selections. There is discussion of establishing new categories for trial by combat that account for different fighting styles. That sounds like progress, Patricia said diplomatically. It is chaos, the official replied, but didn't sound entirely unhappy about it. But perhaps beneficial chaos. The council has become stagnant in many ways. Earth's approach is forcing us to reconsider assumptions we've held for centuries. As they walked toward the medical bay, Walter reflected that maybe that was humanity's real contribution to the galaxy. Not superior technology or military might or diplomatic genius, but the simple, stubborn insistence that old ways weren't necessarily the best ways. That sometimes you needed to bring a honey badger to a battle serpent fight, and trust that determination would find a path to victory. Grendel snored softly in the carrier, already dreaming of whatever honey badgers dreamed about. Probably beehives and tunnels and things that needed biting. The galaxy could speculate all it wanted about Earth's champions and evolutionary advantages and survival adaptations. Grendel would continue being exactly what he'd always been, a small, furious ball of determination that had never learned the meaning of surrender. And if that terrified the galaxy's warrior species, then they probably needed to be terrified. It was good for them. Kept everyone honest when the smallest fighter in the room might just be the most dangerous.